In the grand theatre of World War II, the age of the battleship was drawing to a close. In this video, we will examine the critical errors in judgment that led to the 5 worst naval defeats of the conflict. In late 1941, Britain attempted to deter Japanese aggression toward Malaya and Singapore by sending Force Z led by Admiral Sir Tom Phillips. The force included a modern King George VTH class battleship, the HMS Prince of Wales, an old battlecruiser, the HMS Repulse, and 4 destroyers. While naval leaders already recognized the growing threat of aircraft, many believe fleets could still operate safely beyond bomber range or rely on fighter support. In reality, the British task force was well within the range of Japanese twin-engine bombers, and the Royal Air Force was unable to provide cover. On December 8th, Force Z sailed from Singapore to intercept Japanese invasion convoys. Phillips maintained radio silence and advanced without reconnaissance. A powerful group of 86 Japanese land-based aircraft quickly located the ships in the South China Sea. On December 10th, the task force came under relentless attack. Communication failures and the speed of the Japanese advance left the RAF unable to intervene. The results were devastating. Repulse was struck by several torpedoes and sank at 12:33 p.m., with 508 men lost. Less than an hour later, Prince of Wales capsized and went down at 1:20 p.m., costing 327 lives. Altogether, about 840 sailors were killed. The destruction of Force Z signaled the end of the battleship's dominance without air protection, dealt a crippling blow to Britain's Eastern Fleet, and contributed directly to the fall of Singapore on February 15, 1942. The loss shocked navies worldwide and exposed systemic failures. The British naval commanders underestimated Japanese air power, failed to ensure standing fighter cover, and isolated the fleet through strict radio silence. The sinking of Prince of Wales in Repulse was not simply a failure of leadership, but a tragic demonstration that early war naval doctrine had not yet adapted to modern air warfare. In early 1942, a mixed Allied fleet under the American, British, Dutch, Australian Command, or ABDACOM, faced a Japanese invasion force threatening the Dutch East Indies, commanded by Dutch Rear Admiral Karel Doorman. The fleet included 2 heavy cruisers, HMS Exit and USS Houston, 3 light cruisers, and destroyers from 4 different navies. Despite poor coordination and limited training together, the Allies believed superior numbers and fighting spirit could offset their weaknesses. On February 27, 1942, the fleets clashed in a day-night battle. The lack of a common doctrine quickly unraveled the Allied formation, with ships unable to coordinate fire or maneuver effectively. The Japanese, by contrast, executed a coherent plan, exploiting their mastery of night fighting and the powerful Type 93 Longlands torpedoes. They inflicted devastating losses while sustaining only minor damage to the cruiser Nachai and the destroyer Asagumo. By night's end, the Allied fleet was shattered, and Japan's path to invade Java lay open. The cost was catastrophic. 5 Allied warships, Cortinair, Electra, Jupiter, Deroter, and Java, were sunk along with Admiral Doorman himself and about 2,300 sailors. The heavy cruiser Houston and light cruiser Perth escaped, but were sunk 2 nights later in the Sundrate. Instead of seeking a decisive battle, the Allies might have focused on delaying tactics, targeting Japanese logistics with hit and run attacks before withdrawing to Australia. They underestimated Japanese strengths in torpedo warfare and night combat, and without a unified command structure or premission coordination, the multinational fleet fought as disjointed fragments rather than a cohesive force. The result was a crushing defeat that ended Allied naval resistance in the region. The Battle of Tsevo Island occurred on the night of August 8th and 9th, 1942, during the Guadalcanal campaign, and exposed the dangers of complacency in naval warfare. The Allied screening force included 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers, but the absence of senior leadership proved critical. Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley had left to attend a conference with Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner, leaving the force without clear command at the moment of crisis. Crews were not at full battle stations, and radar was poorly utilized. Vice Admiral Gonishin Mikawa led the Japanese striking force consisted of 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and a destroyer. Exploiting superior night fighting tactics, his ship slept past Allied pickets and attacked shortly after 1:30 a.m. The Allies were caught completely off guard. Radar warnings were either late or ignored, and the lack of readiness meant the defense collapsed almost immediately. The cost was devastating. 4 heavy cruisers, the USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and HMS Canberra were sunk. 2 destroyers, USS Ralph Talbot and USS Patterson, were heavily damaged. In total, nearly 1,100 Allied sailors were killed and 709 wounded, making it one of the worst single defeats in U.S. naval history. The ad hoc command structure left the fleet leaderless at a critical moment. Radar was not fully integrated into defensive procedures with few trained operators or reporting protocols. Most critically, the crews were not kept in a state of constant readiness, leaving them unprepared to repel a night assault. At Sabo Island, complacency and poor coordination handed the Japanese a resounding victory. The Battle of Cape Matapon was fought from March 27th to 29th, 1941, off southern Greece, and it was a decisive clash between the Italian and British navies in the Mediterranean. Admiral Angelo led the Italian fleet in an effort to disrupt British convoys, while Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham commanded the Royal Navy. Thanks to Okra decryptions, the British knew of Italian intentions while the Italians mistakenly believed they faced only a cruiser force. Italian admirals, leading without radar, underestimated the threat of Cunningham's battleships. They exploited this weakness with a deception plan. Carrier aircraft repeatedly harassed the Italians, and late on March 28th, a torpedo crippled the heavy cruiser Pola. Giacchino then made a fatal error by dispatching Zara Fume and several destroyers to assist. They were unaware that British radar-equipped battleships were closing in under cover of darkness. Using radar to track the unsuspecting Italians, the British closed to point-blank range and opened fire. In minutes, Zara and Fume were annihilated, and the destroyers Vittorio Alfieri and Josui Kadui were sunk. The crippled Polo was finished off in the early hours of March 29th. The cost for Italy was catastrophic, with 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers lost. About 200-300 sailors killed or missing, about 160 survivors were rescued by the British, and around 160 by Italian ships. British losses were negligible. The defeat stemmed from flawed assumptions and technological inferiority. Italian commanders misread intelligence, underestimated British radar performance, and committed reinforcements into a trap. A more cautious approach would be to verify intelligence, avoid night action, and refuse to risk major ships in unknown situations. Completed in 1920, HMS Hood was the largest warship in the world when launched and remained the pride of the fleet 2 decades later. Displacing more than 43,000 tons with a crew of 1,418, it combined speed and heavy guns, but at the cost of thin deck armor, which was a serious vulnerability to plunging fire. Plans to add thicker deck armor were postponed, which left her exposed. On May 24, 1941, during the Battle of Denmark Sea, HMS Hood and Prince of Wales engaged the German battleship Bismarck and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. At about 0601 a.m., a German shell, very likely from Bismarck, struck near Hood's magazine. The resulting explosion tore the ship apart, breaking it in 2. Within 3 minutes she sank. Of more than 400, only 3 survived, making it the greatest single tragedy in Royal Navy history. British commanders knew of Hood's serious weaknesses, but pressed the attack, driven by the urgent need to prevent Bismarck from breaking into the Atlantic. HMS Hood should have been reassigned to less risky duties with more modern battleships like HMS King George V leading the interception. Instead, Britain's pride of the fleet became a symbol of vulnerability in the age of modern gunnery. Thank you for watching and see you in our next videos.